Hi and welcome to the tutorial for the Cameron dress. Remember, if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me and we will begin sewing. Once you have all of your pattern pieces, we are going to cut them on our fabric, and right now we are going to do just the top. So I have all of my pieces, including my main fabric and my lining. We are going to start off by interfacing our main fabric to give it some stabilization. We're going to iron that on and then cut it all back out. Here are all of my pieces laid out and interfaced. What we're going to do is start sewing each individual side, leaving out the center, putting our right sides together, pinning and sewing, and I'll show you guys what this looks like when it is done. Once you've finished all that, it should look like this. I like to leave the center for last just to make sure everything is even, and then we're going to repeat those steps and just pin together and sew. Trim off any excess thread and your corset should start to look like this. We are going to repeat those exact same steps for the lining fabric. Now that we have our main fabric and our lining tops ready, we are going to press all of those seams open. You'll see when I get to the curves, I use a tailoring ham. If you don't have a tailoring ham, you can use an old t-shirt or a sweater, just whatever helps get those really flat. Now that you have all of those seams pressed open, we are going to start working on creating the channels for our boning. I'm using a sew-in boning, so I have my tape, and then we are going to have our strips that are about 1.5 inches wide. We're going to take these strips that we've cut and place them so that they match up with our seams and are just a little bit shorter, and we're going to repeat that 3 times for all of those seams. Then we're going to pin them down, making sure they stay really centered. So after I pin all of these down, I also like to go in with a bit of chalk to make sure I really know where my center line is, because I want to sew these on straight since the sewing will be seen on the other side. Everything is pinned. It should look like this. And now we will sew on both sides of this strip, leaving out the center, making sure it stays in the center, and I will show you what this looks like. Here is the inside of our top and the outside with our seam lines on either side of the center. Before we put our boning in those channels, we're actually going to attach our lining. So take your lining and put them right sides together and pin. I like to start pinning at the seams to make sure everything's evening up. And then I go through and fill in the rest. This just makes sure everything is in its right place. And we're gonna sew just the top for right now. As I'm sewing the top, when I get to those points, what I'm doing is putting my needle foot in, putting my presser foot up, turning, and then putting my presser foot back down. I will repeat this for every single one, putting my needle down, presser foot up, turning, presser foot back down, and continuing to sew along. Once this is done, we're going to cut off all of our excess, and then I'm also cutting little tiny slits, especially into the curves. This just makes sure the corset sits nice and flat. As we're turning it inside out, you can use something blunt to make sure everything is turned out correctly. I think I just used a marker cap. Just make sure it's not sharp and doesn't puncture your fabric. Now I'm going to press all of that down, make sure it looks sharp, and then top stitch down that top part. Now that we've done all that, we are finally going to enter in our boning. I'm going to make sure that this is about 1/2 inch short of where I want it to stop. You can see I'm taping off my boning. This is just to make sure it doesn't poke through. You can also burn if you're using plastic, or if you are using steel, you can put the little caps on it. Just make sure it doesn't puncture your fabric. And then we're just going to enter in that boning into the channels that we created earlier. Now we'll begin on the skirt. You can put your top aside for now. So here is my front skirt. We are going to pin and sew those notches that you saw on the pattern. There are 2 on the front and 1 on each back piece. We're going to do this for our main fabric and our lining. Once all of those notches are sewn, we are going to put our pieces right sides together, pin and sew. If you're leaving an open side, you're only going to pin and sew to the slit notch. Leaving the side open is optional, but just know if you're leaving it open, you'll do the same for your lining. Now we're going to take our second back side, put them right sides facing each other, pin and sew all the way down. Repeat this for our lining. So here is my whole skirt, and what we're going to do is take the lining and place it right sides facing each other and try to line these up best we can. I'm pinning at the top, making sure I match up all the seams, and then what we're going to do is pin the entire bottom all the way up the slit, and I'll show you guys what this looks like in a second. So you guys know we are not sewing the top. I only pin the top so that I make sure everything is even and my seams are lining up. We're only going to be sewing the bottom. It will look like this. You can see the entire bottom is sewn, including that open side. And now we're going to sew along the entire bottom and the open side, closing that entire skirt up. Once all of that is sewn down, you're going to trim off the excess, flip it inside out, and press down those seams, especially if you have an open side seam. Press it down to make sure it looks very flat. Next up, we are just going to base stitch our main fabric to our lining. This is not inside out, this is right sides now. And we are going to pin everything down, the sides and the top. And again, this is just a base stitch to connect our main and lining. Now we're going to grab our top. We are going to follow with another base stitch. We are going to the sides and the bottom, just making sure that our main is connected to our lining, matching up all those seams, and again, just base stitching this down. Now that all of that is done, we are finally going to connect our skirt to our top. We are going right sides together. Again, I am making sure all of those seams line up, so I am pinning those first, and then I will go back through and fill in the rest, and we are going to sew all of that together. Once that's sewn, we are going to trim off all of the excess and then press our seams. Once we have this done, we are going to pin the entire back side together from top to bottom, then grab our chalk and our zipper and mark where our zipper ends. What we're now going to do is we are going to base stitch from the top to the chalk mark, and then from the rest, we're going to change our settings and regular sew all the way down to the bottom. So here you can see I am going all the way to my chalk mark. This is just a base stitch, and once I get there, I'm going to change my settings, back stitch a little, and then sew all the way down to the bottom with a normal stitch. Now that this is done, I am just pressing all of my seams open. Make sure these are super flat because that really helps with the zipper. Now with my seam ripper, I'm going to rip open the seam just from where we base stitched. I know it looks like I'm going fast, I'm actually going very slow. Be careful with your fabric. Taking my zipper and following what I have already pressed down so I know where to pin it, I'm going to pin one side of my zipper and then sew this down. We're going to pin and repeat this for the other side, making sure everything is even and looking good. To close out that zipper at the base, I am just doing back and forth to make sure everything is secure. Then finally, I'm just going to trim off any excess threads, and we are done with our dress. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you enjoy it.